Nathan Carter had spent his life fighting battles, first as a Marine, then as a hardworking contractor building homes for other veterans. But he never expected the biggest fight of his life to be over his own driveway. After years of saving, Nathan had finally purchased his dream home in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it was a cozy, well-kept house with a long concrete driveway, perfect for parking his truck and the classic muscle car he had been restoring. It was his sanctuary, his retreat, his property. And that's exactly why Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had a problem with it. Enter HOA Karen. The first time Nathan met Karen, she was already handing him a warning letter. He had just pulled into his driveway, dust still settling from a long workday, when she appeared, clipboard in hand, lips pursed in self-righteous determination. "Mr. Carter," she greeted, her tone dripping with forced politeness. Nathan exhaled, stepping out of his truck. "Can I help you?" Karen extended the folded letter like a royal decree. "You're in violation of community standards. Your driveway extends beyond HOA guidelines and is considered shared community property." Nathan stared at her, then at the letter, then back at her. "Shared community property," he repeated slowly. "Karen, I poured this driveway myself. It's on my land." Karen smiled. Too sweet. Too smug. "Well, actually, according to our revised HOA guidelines, any driveway that extends beyond the original property blueprints is subject to community use." Nathan laughed out loud. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Karen's smile flickered. "It's a violation. You'll need to make the necessary adjustments or allow community access." Nathan cut her off, crossing his arms. "Not happening." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll be fined." Nathan stepped closer, towering over her. "Listen carefully, Karen. This is my driveway. I built it, I paid for it, and I'll be damned if I let some HOA nonsense take it from me." Karen's nostrils flared, but she quickly masked her anger with another tight-lipped smile. "Very well," she said, turning on her heel. "Expect a formal notice from the HOA." Nathan watched her march away, shaking his head. She thought this was over? Not even close. Karen had just declared war, and Nathan wasn't the type to lose. Nathan knew Karen wasn't going to back down easily. She had the kind of petty persistence that made HOA tyrants infamous. Still, he wasn't prepared for just how fast she escalated the situation. The first fine hits. The next morning, as Nathan stepped out to grab his newspaper, he noticed something taped to his front door. A bright red violation notice. He ripped it off and read the bolded text. "Violation. Unauthorized driveway extension. Fine. $750. Deadline for payment. 14 days. Nathan let out a slow breath, running a hand down his face. She actually did it. As if summoned by his frustration, Karen appeared, standing a few houses down, clipboard in hand, pretending not to watch. Nathan raised the paper, his voice carrying down the street. "Hey, Karen. You really trying to shake me down for my own driveway?" Karen strolled over, her usual smug expression firmly in place. "Mr. Carter," she said in her condescending tone, "it's not a shakedown, it's an enforcement of community standards." Nathan chuckled. "You do realize you can't just make up rules, right?" Karen's smile didn't falter. "The HOA board approved the updated guidelines last month." Nathan crossed his arms. "And when exactly was I informed of these new guidelines?" Karen's eyes twitched, just a fraction. She knew damn well she hadn't notified him. "The rules apply to everyone," she said, brushing past his question. "I suggest you comply before further actions are taken." Nathan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You mean like calling the city?" Karen blinked, caught off guard. Because what she didn't know was that Nathan had already done his research. Nathan pushes back. That afternoon, instead of paying the fine, Nathan took a drive to the local zoning office. He spoke to a clerk, laying out the situation. The clerk checked the property records and shook her head. "Sir, your driveway is fully within your property lines. The HOA has zero authority to claim it as community property." Nathan smirked. "That's what I thought." She tapped her pen against her desk. "I'd file a formal complaint with the city's housing department. If the HOA is overstepping, they could face legal repercussions." Nathan's smirk widened. "Now, that's interesting." Karen doubles down. Later that evening, as Nathan relaxed on his porch, he saw a tow truck creeping down the street. His gut tightened. The truck slowed to a stop in front of his house. And stepping out of a car behind it,
Karen.
Nathan immediately stood up. The tow truck driver barely had time to step onto the curb before Nathan intercepted him. "You might want to think real hard before hooking that truck up to anything," Nathan warned. The driver, a burly man with zero interest in HOA politics, held up his hands. "Lady called me, said there was an unauthorized vehicle on community property." Nathan's jaw clenched. He turned to Karen. "Community property?" Karen smiled. "Your driveway, Mr. Carter. It's being reclaimed for shared use. The HOA is enforcing parking regulations." Nathan took a slow step forward, voice low. "Move that tow truck." Karen crossed her arms. "Or what?" Nathan pulled his phone out of his pocket. "Or I call the city," he said. "And when they show up and find you illegally towing a vehicle off private property, they'll fine you instead." Karen's confidence flickered. The tow truck driver, sensing the tension, muttered, "Yeah, I'm not touching this. Lady, you're on your own." He climbed back into his truck and drove off. Karen fumed. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Carter." Nathan grinned.
Nah.
"I think you just did." Karen turned sharply on her heel, storming away. Nathan watched her go, shaking his head. She thought she could bully him into submission? She had no idea who she was dealing with. And this battle? It was just getting started. Nathan had dealt with plenty of tough situations in his time, deployments in hostile zones, unruly clients in his contracting business, even the occasional nosy neighbor. But Karen? She was relentless. And now that he had publicly humiliated her, she was about to make things personal. The false violations start rolling in. The next morning, Nathan woke up to 5 new violation notices taped to his front door. Failure to maintain lawn appearance, fine, $300. Unauthorized structure, driveway, fine, $1,200. Improper trash placement, fine, $500. Unapproved vehicle storage, fine, $750. Refusal to comply with HOA orders, pending legal action. Nathan ran a hand down his face. This was pure retaliation. His lawn was perfectly cut, his trash bins were where they had always been, and, seriously, his driveway was still his. Karen was throwing everything at him, hoping something would stick. And she wasn't done. As he was reading through the absurd violations, a city inspector pulled up in front of his house. Nathan raised an eyebrow. The inspector, a tired-looking man with a clipboard, stepped out and approached him. "Mr. Carter?" Nathan nodded. "That's me. We received an anonymous complaint about unapproved property modifications," the inspector said, glancing around. "Mind if I take a look?" Nathan exhaled slowly. "Let me guess." The anonymous complaint came from a short woman with a superiority complex and a clipboard. The inspector gave a tight smile. "We don't disclose complainants, sir." Nathan gestured to his driveway. "Everything here is up to code. I already checked with the zoning office." The inspector nodded. "That's what I figured. But I still have to do the report." Nathan crossed his arms. "Go for it. But do me a favor. Send Karen the bill for wasting your time." The inspector chuckled, shaking his head before getting to work. Karen's power is slipping. By that evening, Nathan had had enough. It was time to start gathering evidence. He scanned and archived every fine, every notice, every petty complaint. He even installed extra security cameras, making sure he caught every move Karen made. And then, he started talking to his neighbors. What he found? Karen had a pattern. Several homeowners had mysteriously avoided fines, but only after they made donations to the HOA fund. Others had been bullied into compliance after receiving threats of legal action. And some board members? They were starting to get uncomfortable with Karen's leadership. Nathan approached David, one of the few board members who seemed reasonable. "David, Nathan said, keeping his voice low. How much do you really know about what Karen's been doing? David hesitated. Then, after glancing around nervously, he muttered, check the financials. Nathan frowned. What do you mean? David leaned in. I'm saying, the numbers don't add up. Fines get issued, but not all of them end up in the HOA's records. Some of them disappear. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was stealing, setting the trap. Nathan spent the next few days gathering every bit of evidence he could. Security footage of Karen taping fake violations to his door at 2 a.m. Screenshots of his conversations with the zoning office, proving his driveway was legal. And, most importantly, a deep dive into the HOA's finances. David had been right. Karen had been skimming money from homeowners for years. Illegitimate fines, anonymous donations, even misallocated funds from the HOA budget. It was blatant corruption. And now, Nathan had all the proof he needed. This wasn't just a fight over his driveway anymore. This was about taking Karen down. For good. The HOA oversteps and the protagonist strikes back. Nathan had played defense long enough. Now, it was his turn to go on the offensive. He had all the evidence he needed. The fake fines, the shady financials, the security footage of Karen sneaking around his property, and he was about to drop a bombshell that would change everything. But first, Karen was about to make her biggest mistake yet. Karen's most outrageous move. Nathan had just finished setting up a new motion-activated security system when he heard the sound of heavy machinery outside. His gut tightened. He stepped outside and froze. A construction crew was in his driveway, digging it up. A man in a neon vest glanced up. You the homeowner? Nathan's voice was deadly calm. Yeah. What the hell is this? Sidewalk expansion project, the worker said. We're following HOA orders. Nathan's blood boiled. And then he saw her, Karen, standing across the street with her arms crossed, watching like a queen surveying her empire. Nathan marched straight toward her. Karen, he said, voice tight, tell me you did not just order them to rip up my driveway. Karen smiled. Too smug. Too confident. Oh, Mr. Carter, you should really keep up with HOA announcements, she chirped. The board approved a sidewalk beautification project. Your driveway was blocking the new design. Nathan exhaled slowly. You don't have the authority to do this, he said. That's private property. Karen tilted her head. Not according to the HOA's revised map. Nathan's fists clenched. That's when he pulled out his phone. Oh, you mean the map that the city zoning office has zero record of? Karen's smirk wavered. Nathan turned to the construction crew. You got a permit for this? The foreman looked nervous. We were told HOA had clearance. Nathan nodded. Got it. Give me 1 second. He dialed a number. The city inspector he had spoken with earlier. Hey, Mike, Nathan said, keeping his eyes locked on Karen. You got a crew here illegally demolishing my driveway. You might want to get down here. Karen's face drained of color. And within 10 minutes, a city's vehicle pulled up. Karen gets exposed, publicly. The city inspector stepped out, surveying the damage. You gotta be kidding me, he muttered. Then he turned to Karen. Where's your permit for this? Karen stiffened. The HOA approved it. The inspector shook his head. That's not how this works. HOA approval doesn't override city property laws. Nathan crossed his arms. So, Mike, what happens when someone orders unauthorized construction on private property? Mike sighed. Well, if it's done without legal permission, the person responsible is on the hook for all damages. Karen's smug expression shattered. Nathan leaned in slightly, voice mocking. That means you, Karen. Karen spun toward the workers. Stop. Stop everything. But the damage was already done. The crew packed up. The construction was halted. And Karen? She had just committed property destruction, on camera. Nathan took out his final piece of evidence, his phone, and hit play. The security footage of Karen sneaking onto his property. The fake violation notices she left at 2 a.m. The financial documents showing HOA corruption. The neighborhood was watching. The HOA board members? Shifting uncomfortably. And Karen? For the first time ever, she had nothing to say. The beginning of the end. Nathan turned to the board. I think we all know what happens next, he said. You can either remove Karen from the HOA, or I can take this footage straight to the city and file a lawsuit. David, the nervous board member, immediately stood up. I vote to remove Karen from her position, he said. A murmur spread through the crowd. One by one, hands went up. And Karen? She could only watch in horror as the entire neighborhood turned against her. Her power was gone. Her reign was over. Nathan smiled. Checkmate. Karen's final, desperate move. Karen had lost everything. Her grip on the HOA was gone. The neighborhood had turned against her, and Nathan had exposed her corruption in front of everyone. But Karen wasn't done yet. No, she still had one last desperate move to play. And this time, she was about to cross the line into criminal territory. Karen calls the police, and it backfires. 2 days after her humiliating HOA removal, Nathan was enjoying a rare, peaceful evening when flashing red and blue lights lit up his street. A police cruiser pulled into his driveway. Nathan sighed, already knowing who was behind this. The officer, a stocky man with a weary expression, stepped out. Mr. Carter, he said, flipping open his notepad. We got a report of a trespassing incident on HOA property. Nathan blinked. HOA property? The officer nodded. According to the complainant, you've been unlawfully occupying a shared community space. Nathan let out a slow laugh. Let me guess, he said, crossing his arms. The complainant's name starts with K and rhymes with Baron? The officer exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Yeah, look, I don't want to waste your time, but we gotta respond to all calls. Nathan grinned. Then let me make this easy for you. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his emails from the zoning office, and handed it over. The officer read the screen, then sighed. This says the HOA has zero legal claim to your driveway, he muttered. Nathan shrugged. Yeah. And that Karen's claim is completely made up. The officer looked back toward Karen's house. You know what, he said, flipping his notepad shut. I think I'm going to go have a chat with Ms. Whitmore. Nathan smirked. Tell her I said hi. Karen commits an actual crime. That police stunt? It wasn't Karen's last move. Oh no, she was desperate now. So desperate that she went full criminal. Nathan only found out when his security cameras caught a stranger sneaking around his garage at 3 a.m. When he checked the footage, it was a private investigator. And guess who had hired him? Nathan grinned. Karen had finally messed up. Bad. Nathan's revenge, with legal firepower. The next morning, Nathan took the footage straight to the police station. Someone hired this guy to snoop on my property, he told the officer at the front desk. And, if I had to guess, it was Karen Whitmore. The officer inserted the flash drive, watching the footage. His eyebrows shot up. This, the officer muttered. This is trespassing. Nathan leaned forward. And tampering with my mailbox? That's a federal crime. The officer looked up. You want us to pay her a visit? Nathan grinned. Oh, absolutely. Karen's public humiliation. That evening, Nathan was enjoying another peaceful porch moment when police cruisers pulled up to Karen's house. Lights flashed. Officers knocked. The neighborhood came outside to watch. Karen argued. She flailed her arms, tried to play the victim. But the police weren't having it. When they pulled out their notebook, reading her the charges, the neighborhood erupted in whispers. She actually did that. She's insane. I knew she was bad. But this? Nathan leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee. And then came the moment he'd been waiting for. A police officer looked Karen dead in the eye and said, Ma'am, you're under investigation for trespassing, harassment, and potential mail tampering. You need to come with us. Karen's face drained of color. No, 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 you can't do this, she screeched. I'm the head of the HOA. The officer sighed. Not anymore, you're not. The entire neighborhood watched as Karen was escorted into the back of the police car. Someone actually started clapping. Nathan just smiled. Karen had dug her own grave. And this time, there was no escaping the consequences. HOA crumbles and Karen's downfall. Karen's dramatic arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. For years, she had ruled with an iron clipboard, threatening, fining, and intimidating homeowners into submission. But now, the queen had fallen. And with her gone, the HOA was about to fall apart, too. The HOA board turns on Karen. With Karen under investigation, the remaining HOA board members were panicking. At an emergency meeting, David, the board member who had secretly helped Nathan, stepped up to the podium. He cleared his throat, glancing at the angry homeowners. Effective immediately, he announced, Karen Whitmore has been removed from the HOA board. The room erupted in cheers. David continued, looking even more nervous. And given the ongoing investigation into HOA funds, the board has decided to, he swallowed hard, dissolve the HOA entirely. Another wave of cheers. A woman raised her hand. What about all the bogus fines we had to pay? David gulped. We'll be issuing refunds where possible, he admitted. And anyone who has an unresolved fine? It's been voided. More cheers. The HOA was dead. And Karen? She had officially lost everything. Karen's swift fall from power. Within 48 hours, Karen's house was listed for sale. The woman who had once dictated every aspect of the community was now fleeing it. Her perfectly manicured lawn? Overgrown. Her usual morning patrols with a clipboard? Gone. Her infamous email rants about mailbox colors? Silenced. One morning, Nathan stepped outside to grab his mail when he noticed a moving truck in Karen's driveway. Karen stood beside it, barking orders at the movers, a shell of her former self. Nathan took a long sip of his coffee, making zero effort to hide his smirk. As she turned, their eyes met. For the first time ever, she had nothing to say. Nathan gave her a polite nod. Safe travels, Karen. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. And just like that, Karen Whitmore disappeared from the neighborhood for good. The HOA faces full legal consequences. Karen's downfall wasn't just a win for the neighborhood. It was the beginning of the end for the entire corrupt HOA system she had built. Nathan had played his cards perfectly. And now, the HOA was about to face some real consequences. The HOA faces the heat. A week after Karen fled the neighborhood, Nathan got a call from the city's housing authority. Mr. Carter, the official said, I just wanted to personally inform you that our investigation into your HOA has concluded. Nathan smirked. Let me guess, it wasn't pretty? The official chuckled. That's putting it lightly. The HOA has been fined $50,000 for illegal enforcement of non-existent rules. Nathan grinned. That's not all, the official continued. Several former board members are facing civil lawsuits for mishandling funds. And Karen? Well, she's about to have a whole new set of legal problems. Nathan leaned back in his chair. This was better than he'd hoped. What about the homeowners who got scammed? He asked. We're working on that, the official assured him. All illegitimate fines will be refunded. Nathan nodded, satisfied. But he had one more move left to make. Nathan's final power move. With Karen gone and the HOA crumbling, the remaining board members were scrambling to avoid more lawsuits. So, David, the last standing board member, called an emergency homeowners vote. The topic? Dissolving the HOA permanently. Nathan showed up, arms crossed, watching as David nervously addressed the crowd. I think we can all agree, David began, sweating bullets, that under Karen's leadership, mistakes were made. Someone in the crowd shouted, Mistakes? She tried to steal our property. David flinched. Yes, well, given the circumstances, I propose we dissolve the HOA completely. Silence. Then, Nathan stood up. I second that motion. More voices chimed in. About time, let's do it. Burn it to the ground. The vote? Unanimous. The HOA was officially dead. And Nathan? He had won. The final nail in the coffin. With the HOA gone, the neighborhood was finally free. No more Karen. No more ridiculous fines. No more power-hungry board members controlling people's homes. And Karen's legacy of control and intimidation? Completely erased. Nathan took one last stroll through the neighborhood, watching as Families repainted their houses without fear. Homeowners set up yard decorations freely. Kids rode bikes without being scolded for violating HOA regulations. For the first time in years, the community felt like a real neighborhood again. And Karen? She wasn't coming back. Karen had always believed she was untouchable. For years, she ruled the neighborhood with an iron grip, using fear and intimidation to control homeowners. But now, she had nothing left. And karma? It was about to finish the job. Karen hits rock bottom. Word traveled fast. The HOA was dissolved, the lawsuits were stacking up, and Karen had lost everything. Her house? Sold at a loss. Her reputation? Destroyed. Her cushy life? Gone. But Nathan wasn't done yet. One afternoon, he got a call from a former HOA board member. "You won't believe this," the man chuckled. "I just found out where Karen ended up." Nathan leaned forward, intrigued. "Where?" "You're gonna love this," the man said. "She got a job as an assistant property manager for another HOA. Nathan burst out laughing. It was too perfect. One last encounter. A few weeks later, Nathan had to visit a nearby town for work. While grabbing coffee at a small cafe, he saw her. Karen. She was wearing a cheap office blazer, her once pristine hair now looking less polished, and she was arguing with a customer over a $25 late fee. Nathan couldn't resist. He walked over, leaned in, and said just loud enough for her to hear, "I hope you like following the rules." Karen whipped around, her face draining of color as she recognized him. Nathan just smiled, tipped his coffee toward her, and walked out. Poetic justice. Epilogue and final mic drop. With Karen gone and the HOA officially dissolved, the neighborhood transformed overnight. Gone were the ridiculous fines, the passive-aggressive notices, and the constant fear of violating some imaginary rule. Now, people were free. No more Karen lurking with her clipboard. No more power-hungry HOA board breathing down everyone's necks. No more nonsense about driveways being community property. For the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt like a community again. And Nathan? He finally got to enjoy his home in peace. A moment of humor. One evening, Nathan was sitting on his porch, sipping his coffee, when a neighbor approached with a piece of paper in hand. "Hey, Nathan," the man said with a grin. "Since you took down the HOA, we thought you might want to see this." Nathan took the paper, raising an eyebrow. It was a mock violation notice. Infraction. Owning a driveway too awesome for this neighborhood. Fine. 1 free drink at the next barbecue. Nathan burst out laughing. He shook his head, crumpling the fake ticket. They really tried. The neighbor clapped him on the back. "Come on, hero. Burgers are on the grill." As he walked toward the gathering, Nathan glanced at his perfectly legal driveway, a satisfied smile on his face. Karen had tried everything. And in the end, she'd lost. Fade to black.